What's going on, everybody, and welcome in to this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you, Thursday, August 14th, 2025. Today's an off day for the Cardinals, so a good time to sit down and reflect upon the terror that was wrought upon the fan base with the last 2 days against the Rockies. Cardinals lose in pretty grueling fashion on Wednesday afternoon, 6-5. The Rockies take the win, they take the series, and leave you wondering what the hell just happened, right? The Cardinals had beaten the Dodgers. They had beaten the Cubs. And you had a thrilling win in game one over the Rockies and felt like, man, the momentum is right there to be grabbed. You take it by the neck and you roll through the series. And then you welcome the Yankees into town and, we have some fun talking about a possible wild card push. And then the next 2 days just kick you in the teeth. And the Cardinals are now back at 500, basically back to square one. And you just can't possibly, statistically, they could still make a run to the wild card. I understand they're whatever it is, 4 or 5 games out. It's not a number that's insurmountable. But when you talk about the vibes of it all, there's no way, right? There's no way that you can expect to make a wild card push when you're losing 4 out of 6 to the Rockies in 2025. We've talked about the Rockies, and we've said this is going to be the worst team in Major League history. Since 1899, the Cleveland Spiders, I think they lost 140-something games. The White Sox of last year were the worst one with 121 losses. And the Rockies were going to beat that, and they still might. But it might be single-handedly because of the Cardinals if they don't. Because Colorado took 4 games over the Cardinals this year. That's like 12.5% of Colorado's total wins. The Cardinals are responsible for 25% of Colorado's series wins this season. What happened? The second game of the series, the Cardinals just didn't score. Decent enough pitching. They lost that game 3-0. I think I saw from Matt Pauley of KMOX, 15 of the 17 most hardest hit baseballs of the day in the game on Tuesday night. And so, maybe that was just a game of bad luck. But you cannot chalk up a loss to the Rockies to bad luck. I'm sorry. It doesn't cut the mustard. Doesn't pass the vibe test. Wednesday, you had a lead. Cardinals led from the majority of this game. It was 5-2 after 5 innings. You had homers from Burleson left on left, Lars Nootbaar left on left against Gomber. Gomber's like the only lefty the Cardinals are able to hit, and they got to him, 5 runs over 5. But they couldn't get to the mediocre bullpen of the Rockies. McGreevy did a nice enough job. Quality start, 6 innings, 3 runs. And then, the Cardinals bullpen, we've praised it a bunch, but it is lacking, the core pieces that it had before the trade deadline. And last night they didn't get it done, or yesterday afternoon. Leahy gives up a run. O'Brien gave up a couple hits, but was clean. And JoJo gives up the homer in the ninth inning, and the Cardinals lose it 6-5. They weren't able to tack on offensively after that point. But again, they did enough against the starter. They should have been able to win this game 5-3, 5-4, something like that, and they lose it. And so now you're going, well, it happened again. Let me know what you think. I mean, it's just 2 steps forward and then maybe 2 or 3 steps back is the way it feels right now for the Cardinals. So I don't think they're making a playoff push. You don't think they're making a playoff push. We'll try to avoid talking about that as much as possible until they, maybe they go on a run that we have to talk about it again. But realistically, it's just not in the cards. Because you didn't do what you had to do against a team like the Rockies. That's really what it boils down to. If you beat the Rockies, 4 out of 6 wins this year would have been enough, because even though they lost the first series, you sweep this one, Cardinals would have been right there in the mix. Standings-wise, the Mets have come back toward you. Ryan Helsley, I think, having a little bit of a rocky go with the Mets so far early in his tenure. Mets at 64 and 56. So the Cardinals are still 4 games back of the Mets. Has anybody passed the Mets yet? Same. The Reds are a game behind them. So the Cardinals are still 4 games out, as crazy as it is. But there's no feeling of playoff for this team right now. You could have been 63 wins and 59 losses. You could have been right there on their heels, just like the Reds. You could have been, 2 games back, basically. Maybe that's not quite right. 63 and 59. Yeah, that would have been 1 in the loss column and 1 in the win column and 3 in the loss column. 2 games back. And it's 4 instead. So let me know in the comments how you're feeling. I know the answer is probably that you're not feeling great. But that was disappointing. You can't let that happen in the Rockies series. I want to talk about something else that's disappointing, though. I don't want to harp too much on the last couple of games because I know that people are fed up and I ranted for 5 minutes. Let's move on to something else that we can be maybe a little frustrated by. And this is not new. All right. This is not something that is just cropped up for the first time. I'm talking about the way the Cardinals manage their 40-man roster under John Mozeliak specifically. John Mozeliak joined TMA on the morning after on 101 ESPN. I believe this was yesterday. And Martin Kilcoyne, who does a great job, sports director for Fox 2, love Martin, asked a very relevant question of Cardinals Pobo John Mozeliak. Asked him about the idea of bringing up some prospects in September, down the stretch. Guys like JJ Wetherholt, Quinn Mathews, and the merits of potentially doing that, what the value would be. I'm going to play this clip for you. Hopefully this works, and I can get the audio to function and cooperate for us. You'll hear the question from Martin and then the answer from Mo. And just what he goes to right away when answering a question like this one, I think is kind of the epitome of still what's wrong with the way the Cardinals have approached things in recent seasons. And it will identify at a certain point whether, okay, is this John Mozeliak? Is this the way ownership views it, or is this a Mo thing? Because pretty soon, Chaim Bloom's going to be the guy in there. But here was John Mozeliak when asked by Martin Kilcoyne about the idea that, hey, would there be some value to bringing up some of these guys for the stretch, getting them some experience? I'll play this clip for you, then we'll talk about it.
Do you think there's any value in calling up a Quinn Mathews or a JJ Wetherholt just to get them big league experience? And also a little bit of that is marketing or selling the fans on the future. Do you think that'll be in play here in September?
Ultimately, I think that'll be a discussion that we all have to participate in, but it's not the protection year. And so I think it's not necessarily in the best interest for the organization to do that, even though it might be fun and exciting. But, you're not forced to put them on the roster this offseason. And so that's something that should definitely be part of the equation.
Okay, you're not forced to put them on. That was not the question, but okay. You're not forced to put them on the roster because, guys, it's not their protection year. It is not. They're not eligible for Rule 5 this winter, which is to say you don't have to put them on the roster. So why would you do it? Even if it would be fun and exciting and good. The idea of referencing a protection year when it comes to the eventual call-up of Weatherholt and Quinn Mathews, to me, is beyond asinine. Especially in the case of Weatherholt, because Weatherholt was drafted last year, and Rule 5 is like when you're going into your 5th year or you're in your 5th year after being drafted or signed, you have to be protected, put on the 40-man roster, or you become Rule 5 eligible during that November. I think it's in November when they run that draft. And so JJ Wetherholt is never going to be somebody, never in his life is going to be somebody that is subject to any level of consideration when it comes to Rule 5. He's going to be in the big leagues before that, long before that becomes a factor. This is his 2nd year, 2, 3, 4. I mean, it's not ever going to come into play with JJ Wetherholt. So, like, again, if we're talking like that's the driving force behind a decision process, is the implication that you're going to wait? And of course, it's not going to be Mo's decision, but you're going to wait 2 more years before putting JJ on the 40-man because, well, you don't have to protect him before then. And again, that was a short 20-second answer. There's more context, I'm sure, that Mozeliak would be able to explain. But that's what he chose to say first. When you're asked the question, you get to pick what you talk about and what you prioritize as the first thing. Making the most important thing the most important thing. He starts talking about protection years. and whether or not they have to put him on the 40-man. All right, so for Weatherholt, it's just irrelevant because if he's not on the roster this fall, he's going to be on the 40-man at some point in 2026 because he's going to be on the team. Might not be from day one in spring after spring training, might not be opening day, but it's not ever going to become like a 40-man thing where he's got to be put on there because of Rule 5. That's never going to be the case. Quinn Mathews, ideally, unless he gets injured, I mean, you can see it a little bit more with him because the Cardinals have a squeeze when it comes to a couple of their prospects that had Tommy John, where it's now like, all right, they're on the 40-man. They're going to occupy a year of service time because you can't put them on the long-term IL because they're minor leaguers. And so, how does you're going to basically have that count against you as a 40-man spot. I believe that's the way that goes down for guys like Tekoa Roby. Cooper Jerpy's going to have to go on because of what John Mozeliak is talking about when it comes to protection year. But Quinn Mathews is close. I mean, he struggled last night a little bit. He had 6 strikeouts through 2 innings, but then command got to him. 3rd inning, I think he only made it 3 innings, gave up a few runs, but had like 7 strikeouts. So this stuff is obviously still potent for him. Still looking for more velocity and not, have not been able to get it. Keep bugging me in the comments too to get Down on the Farm as a visual graphic on the screen for these new video versions of B-Schaeff Daily so that I can get back to doing those again. It's just, I can do it. It's just going to take me a little bit of time to figure out. But that's your update from Down on the Farm yesterday is Quinn Mathews was sharp, but he wasn't. He was effective, but he wasn't sharp. That's probably a better way to put it. 7 strikeouts in 3 innings, but couldn't go deeper because of control issues. Quinn Mathews, look, if you don't think he's ready, that's a reason not to call him up. If you don't think he's ready to contribute to the big league team or ready to experience the big leagues without adverse effects, that's a reason not to call him up. Citing his protection year and the fact that it's still a couple of years away is not a reason. It's just not. Because guess what? The Cardinals don't have a 40-man roster crunch. They don't. I understand that there are a bunch of players that they're going to have to add to the 40-man this offseason. I believe that list includes Jimmy Crooks, Leonardo Bernal, several of the Bryson Mouts, I believe, several AA starters are going to be part of that. It's like 6 or 7 guys. Maybe you don't protect all of them because we don't know if guys are going to get selected in the Rule 5 draft. For a team to select a player, they have to be willing to put that player on their active 26-man roster all year. And if you're talking about AA starters, what's that going to look like? There will be teams that if it's a solid AA arm and the Cardinals don't protect him, there will be teams that say, screw it. We'll throw him in our bullpen for a year and wait and see. Cardinals had this happen to them years ago. San Diego was notorious for doing that. And off the top of my head, I forget the gentleman's name, but he ended up, and you'll know in the comments, people will remember. I'm just not going to look it up. Ended up pitching in their bullpen, and then, he didn't ever really amount to anything, but he was a guy that was in high A at the time and was claimed or drafted in the Rule 5. So I respect that the Cardinals have got to add some guys. I think the roster right now is at 39. I'm not going to count them all, but I think it's about 39. So let's say they've got to add 7. All right, let's say that puts them to 46. If my math is slightly off, apologize, but let's say that puts him to 46. Well, Michaelis is off because he's a free agent to be, so 45. They've got some guys that I'm skeptical they're going to hold through. Like Sem Robertson is an interesting case because they could decide to take him off the 40-man. Another team, if they decide to pass him through waivers, could add him to their 40-man, but it would be the same situation for that team. They would have to hold Sem Robertson through a year of Tommy John recovery on their big league roster, essentially. Not their active, but their 40-man, and he would count against their 40-man, if I'm understanding correctly. That's probably what would happen, but I just don't know for sure that a team's going to be willing to do that with Sem Robertson. And so you could probably take him off the 40-man. All right, I don't know what they're going to do with that. A little bit more risky for like a Jerpy, a Roby, guys who you feel have a little bit more upside than Robertson, because Robertson wasn't pitching that well anyway. And the Kloffenstein was a guy that they just got rid of due to injury, and he wasn't even really hurt. He pitched this year, and they outrighted him off the 40 at the end of last season. So, like, if they do something like that with Robertson, okay, 44. Zach Thompson, skeptical that they hold him to the 40-man. He's just had setback after setback. And in fairness, he might be he is on the long-term IL. He's an example. They've held on the big league roster all year, which is a little bit strange. Like if you were going to just get rid of him, maybe you would have probably already done so. But they haven't. But okay, like Thompson, is that another one that's a malleable spot? Yeah, we'll see. That's all because of injury. That could absolutely be the way that goes. Do they, like, is Garrett Hampson here next year? Probably not, right? Probably not. So already, we haven't really even had to try very hard, and we're like, okay, we're at 43, 42. Veneziano is the lefty that they picked up, reliever. Haven't seen him yet. Alcala is the guy they just picked up. I'm not saying they're going to just be willing to cast those guys aside, but, we don't know yet. Without even really straining, we've found a few spots for the 40-man. And then you could talk about, like, guys that are younger that you don't necessarily want to give up on, but, like, what's the role for Jose Fermin? Are they going to give him a shot or not really? He's been blocked because he's kind of a middle infielder. They've made him an outfielder. They haven't used him there, even though they have a need for a right-handed hitting presence off their bench. Okay, maybe that's another one. And again, they might be able to stay in the organization even if he's not on the 40. I don't know. Matt Koperniak has not had a good AAA season. He's a younger player, but if a guy is on your 40-man roster and he's healthy and active and he's not a consideration to be called up, Cardinals have called up several guys this year. Koperniak has not performed, has not been given that consideration. All right, I think we're basically down to 40 already without even really trying to cut anybody that we're really worried is going to either get claimed or we're going to regret in the end. Not to diminish the contributions of these players to the organization, but we're being realistic. But like, I hate doing this because it's like, all right, here's the guys you can get rid of, and that's a little bit flippant. I don't like doing that. But I evaluate and analyze the Cardinals for a living. I have to talk about it. Okay, let's talk about catchers. Pozo, Pajes, Herrera are the three catchers on your team right now, and Herrera's not a catcher, so take him off that list. He's going to be on the 40-man, obviously, but in a different category. Bernal and Crooks are going to come up and be on the 40-man this offseason. They'll have four catchers on the 40. How they manage that, like, we all love Joe Pozo. But, like, is there a competition in spring where, if Crooks wins a job or if Bernal shoots up the ladder and wins a job, does Pozo become somebody that they trade or something happens there? Does Pajes become I know the organization loves Pajes. I don't think they're considering moving him. But what if Crooks or Bernal comes up and they're a defensive stalwart? And it's like, okay, maybe that's your primary. I don't know. My point is, that's if you add every single guy from the 40-man crunch when it comes to Rule 5. I just do not think that it makes sense to manage backwards when it comes to the 40-man. If JJ Wetherholt is ready to be a big leaguer and help you, and there's no service time consideration here. It doesn't cost you an extra year of JJ Wetherholt to bring him up now. It doesn't, and as long as you wait a week or two, it doesn't even cost you his rookie eligibility where he could go on and win Rookie of the Year next year and you recoup it. You gain a draft pick. Same thing would be true of Quinn Mathews. But I think once there's fewer than 45 days left in the season, if you believe those players are ready, call them up. If there's a spot to use them. With Quinn Mathews, there would be. They could use innings for sure. The rotation is beleaguered right now. With Weatherholt, maybe not, because if Arenado's coming back, you're gonna have another kind of logjam on the infield. So if they don't bring him up for those reasons, say that though. Don't go to the 40-man protection stuff, which I consider to be putting the cart before the horse, because it's managing it backwards. It's penny wise and pound foolish, I think is the phrase. We're so worried about the 37th, 8th, 9th, and 40th spot on the 40-man and whether or not, you make another mistake, because there have been some mistakes made in the past where the Cardinals give up on a guy too early. He turns into somebody somewhere else. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's a narrative that I think it has impacted the way the front office thinks, because they are penny wise when it comes to keeping these guys on the 40-man and hoarding them. But the pound foolish nature of it is when there's actually an opportunity to use these players, you have to use your 40-man as an extension of your 26. And they do it very well with the bullpen. They call guys up and down all the time. But if you've got guys that aren't contributing to your 40, from your 40 to your 26, and they're not options to do so, and they're not top prospects that are just not ready yet, What are they doing on your team? They don't fill the purpose that I think is destined for that role on the 40-man roster. All these guys that would come up from AA, maybe they're not ready for the big leagues yet. They'll all start in AAA next year, let's say. Well, that's okay. They're prospects that just aren't ready yet. But these guys that have been depth fodder for years, and then when it comes time to need a piece for depth, and you don't use them, what are they doing there? And why is that going to be the reason not to make a move that makes your team better or gives a fledgling star like Weatherholt or Quinn Mathews, if you think they're ready, an opportunity to gain some big league experience? They did it with Mason Wynn in 2023. Wasn't his protection year, I don't think. Maybe it was. Drafted in 20, 21, 22, 23. So maybe that's a little bit different because 24 would have perhaps been that fifth year. But either way, they're both going to be Cardinals before the protection year thing is relevant. That being said, John Mozeliak isn't going to be the one making the decision at that point. And so if part of this is, hey, those are just the words that Mo felt he had to speak to cover for the fact that it doesn't sound good to say, I'm not going to really do much. I'm going to let Heim have the flexibility, because that takes you out of 2025, which the Cardinals, a lot of fans are already out with their attention. But it's not a good thing to hear, right? It's like, well, this year doesn't really matter, and I'm on the way out the door anyway. And so I don't want to put a guy on the roster that Heim would then have to, he's now stuck with that guy on the roster. Not that you're stuck with Weatherholt, like he's probably coming up anyway next year. But if they're not 100% sure that he will, maybe they don't want to make that decision too soon, because it's going to be a different guy dealing with the ramifications of that in the spring if they don't want to use him on the 26-man roster. So it gives Heim more flexibility to wait. And certainly with Quinn, it would. Because, again, what happens if he comes up and he gets hurt, and then it's like, well, crap, we didn't have to have him injured on the 40-man for a whole year. So with Mathews, there's a little bit more of a factor to that, I suppose. And I question a little bit more whether Quinn is truly ready, because he's had up and down numbers, up and down velocity. And so if they don't think he's ready, that's their evaluation. I'm not criticizing that part of it. But that's not what they said. And again, maybe they just can't say, well, Quinn Mathews isn't ready. There's probably a way you could say that that's PR savvy and sound and doesn't, sound bad or critical of the player. You could talk about, really like the progress from Quinn Mathews, but he's, learning at the AAA level right now how to deal with certain, rigors of a long season and how to pitch with less, how to, whatever it is that you say to indicate that we don't think he's quite ready. That's more than enough reason not to call him up. But the fact that it's like a Pavlovian response. The first thing we go to is protection year. He doesn't need to be protected. Who cares? You don't have a 40-man crunch. That's my rant. That's what I got on that. Maybe I'm wrong. I've been wrong so many times. But when I see something, I'm going to say something. I'm like, evaluating this logic feels very John Mozeliak Cardinals over the past handful, maybe more, of years. And like I said, he gets ripped for having let all these great talented players go that they didn't get anything back for, giving up on a guy too soon. That's the narrative. It's not really true. It doesn't happen as often as you think it does. Arozarena was traded for a player that's currently in the Cardinals rotation. So was it a smashing slam dunk of a trade? Maybe not, but it's not like they gave up on Arozarena and got nothing. Like, Libby's contributed. All right, it's a trade. It's a baseball trade. It's the kind of trade they should be willing to make, frankly. But I think they're a little bit afraid to do now, because we've seen the way that narratives have shaped the opinion on those deals in the past. Adolis Garcia, right? Cardinals gave up on him. So did everybody else. Nobody else wanted him. And then he ended up having some good years with Texas. Okay. But I was an advocate of Dylan Carlson's to say, hey, give him an opportunity. And they did for a while, and it didn't work out. He didn't have it. He's flaming out of baseball, right? He was a bust, 100%. Dylan Carlson became a bust. But they didn't turn around and regret getting rid of him. Tyler O'Neill, yeah, maybe to an extent, but they knew what they were doing with O'Neill at the time. They knew that he needed a change of scenery. And to become the organization that doesn't always need their guys to need a change of scenery before they're good somewhere else, that's probably should be a goal. But it doesn't happen as often as you feel like it does. And so for the Cardinals to seemingly use that as their logic behind why they have to hoard their 40-man pieces that they probably are never going to use, it's like they squeeze every last bit of life out of them until they're truly useless to the rest of the league. Luke Baker is a great example. Luke Baker never was going to amount to anything, perhaps. Maybe that was the case, but they held him for however many more months than they needed to. Granted, again, you can, and I always try to give context. I'm going to be critical, but then I'm going to say, here's why they probably did it this way. Once you got Blaze Jordan, archetypically, he's like the archetype of a player that's going to fill the Luke Baker role on your team and within your 40-man. So you don't need Luke Baker anymore, and that would be the reason they dumped him when they did. It's just stuff like that, though, where it's like you could look right now at the 40-man roster and see a number of guys who I'm not sure that you'll never feel a pang of guilt for letting the guy go too early. I can't guarantee you that. But don't manage the roster backwards and protect the 40th guy because you're worried that he could turn into a league average player somewhere, even though you've never been willing to use him here. Don't worry about that guy. Cast him aside. He's not of value to you, especially when he's potentially blocking your next superstar. You're hopeful that this JJ can become something. So I'm not saying I have all the answers, but that to me, it was a weird way to hear the explanation for why not go Mason win mode like they did in 2023 when it comes to JJ or Quinn Mathews. The 40-man protection thing is not going to be what drives the two careers on those players. It's not. They're not going to wait for that as their invitation to bring him up. Chaim Bloom's going to bring him up when they're ready. I'm sure of it. Maybe they wanted to give him more flexibility, and so that's why they wait. But find a creative way to say that rather than talking about, because it is messaging. It maybe doesn't matter, and maybe like 12 total fans in the fan base noticed the clip from TMA. Probably more. They have a good listenership, but it's just the messaging of it. It's the malaise in the approach to it that I feel like have gotten on people's nerves. And the Cardinals are not a terrible organization. They're a 500 club again. They're a 500 club last year. They have one losing season. Mo gets ripped a little bit harder than he should, but also I think he has not maximized the approach to putting together a winner the last few seasons. And whether that stems from fear of making the wrong decision or whatever it is, I don't think it's controversial to say that they have not been as effective as they could be with the way that they've done this thing. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments section below. Appreciate you guys tuning in to B-Schaeff Daily. Today's an off day. We'll come back with more throughout the rest of the week and the weekend as the Cardinals are getting ready to host the Yankees. Maybe they turn things around. Maybe they play great, and we get sucked back into the wild card talk. But for now, that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys as always, and we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.